Any incoherence on my part. It's been 36 hours since I've been traveling. This morning I was supposed to talk about the roots of radicalization. Well, I'm told that that session is all over and done with, and I am to come to the solutions.
You can talk about the problems.
So I've had to completely rethink what I had to say in the 3 minutes that I've been sitting over here. In the context of Pakistan, if we are to look for solutions, then the first requirement is that we've got to have an analytical framework. And I propose one such framework. Maybe it's not adequate, but first of all, we've got to identify the main players which lie behind this huge increase in radicalization and in terrorism within the country. I don't think anyone will dispute that terrorism has now become virtually a part of life within Pakistan. You don't know whether when you go to a market you will come back in one place, or when you turn on your television, what incident will you hear of? We've, in just these last 2 weeks, seen hundreds of people massacred. Those praying in mosques, those in public places. We've seen policemen, soldiers, everybody attacked. So let's identify the main players. And I would say that they are the army, the political establishment, by which I mean the ruling party as well as the opposition, the religious parties, and finally, the judiciary. These all have become the major players which are determining the future of Pakistan. On the issue of radicalization and terrorism, I'd say you see ambiguity pretty much everywhere except with the religious parties. I mean the Jamaat-e-Islami and the Jamiyat-e-Ulema-e-Islam, who are pretty clear that they're not going to say a word against it. And in fact, they are not just quietly, but at times openly supportive of it. Even in the situation where you had this horrific bombing of the Islamic University in the Sharia faculty, where you had 2 suicide bombers, one going to the girls' cafeteria, the other targeting the male cafeteria, not one religious party condemned that. On the other hand, one sees ambiguity within the others. Let me give you a glimpse of that ambiguity as we see it today. Now, there's scarcely any doubt that Hafiz Saeed, who is the head of the Lashkar-e-Taiba, renamed as Jamaat-ud-Dawa, who was the principal architect of the Mumbai attacks, 2008. He's to be seen everywhere now, giving fiery lectures, saying that what happened was merely what India deserved, and that it deserves more. He's in the company of the religious parties, of Sayyid Munawar Hassan, of the head of the Jamaat-e-Islami, various other religious leaders, and he is not being stopped by the establishment. We had this amazing phenomenon of Maulana Abdul Aziz, who was one of the 2 brothers who headed the Red Mosque, not only released, but now he moves around Islamabad with a police escort. And here is a man who was in open conflict with the Pakistan army. And now let me tell you that I asked a very important general. In fact, I'd say, I can't give you his name, obviously, but he's number 4, somewhere in the hierarchy. I asked him, I said, General, what's up? I thought you guys were at war with the Red Mosque militants. I was there and I saw artillery firing, light artillery. I saw rockets. There were lots and lots who were dead, and you lost a whole bunch of commandos. You also lost some senior officers over there. And he said, absolutely right. I lost one of my very dear juniors over there. So I said, what's up? How come he's been exonerated of fighting against the state? How come he's even been exonerated of taking over the children's library, which is just opposite the Red Mosque? I mean, this whole thing went on for 6 months. There is camera evidence. There's evidence of thousands of people. And so how come he's been released? He says, look, don't ask me this question because it was the Ministry of Interior which wanted him out. And he said, I got to tell you something. They just haven't released him and given him that police escort. They've given him a plot of land in Bahria town. So I said, that means you're not in charge? He says, no. Now, let me go to what a minister, I'm sorry I can't, for reasons of confidentiality, can't tell you who, but it's somebody very high up in the political establishment. And I asked him, I said, how do you feel about the composite dialogue with India being resumed? And he said, great. So I said, but Hafiz Saeed is walking all over the place and he's bellowing threats. So how do you deal with that? He says, yeah, they're going to stomp all over me. But I just can't do anything because the powers that be have determined that it must be this way. So what one sees is helplessness on the part of the army, which one thinks is in control of things, and helplessness on part of the political establishment, which is our elected government. Then you see this amazing thing that the judiciary, for which the country had really sacrificed a lot, is simply impotent when it comes to matters of prosecuting terrorism. In fact, I do not know of a single instance where there has been a conviction for acts of terrorism, although they catch people every day. I can recall that interview of that suicide bomber on Geo television, and he was interviewed with the camera behind him, so you couldn't see his face, but the interviewer asked him, he said, well, now that you've been caught, do you think you're going to get away? He said, yes. So he says, so the interviewer says, is that because you believe in God or is there something else? He says, I certainly believe in God, but there is something else. And so you see no prosecutions. Okay, now, since I have only a little bit of time left, and I have to give you solutions, let me say that any solution or any possible solution has to be put into a supply-demand framework. Well, let's understand where the demand comes from first. The fact is that the militancy in Pakistan didn't just drop from the skies. It came about because there was a demand for it, there was a need for it. And yes, people will say, go back to 1979, which is absolutely right, which is when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and the United States and Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, we together created the great global jihad, for which Saudi Arabia hasn't paid much of a price, but Pakistan and the United States have paid, and Pakistan has paid a lot more than the United States. We could go back to that, but then after all the Soviet Union collapsed, and then Pakistan did need these jihadis, even after the original aim was done with, and that was to liberate Kashmir. And so, yes, these mujahideen were created by the Pakistan army and the intelligence agencies. And today, the fact is that we're not quite sure whether we want to get rid of them or not. There is still ambiguity. I say there's ambiguity because there's a huge price that even the army is paying. Just look what happened 2 days ago. You had 40 Pakistan army soldiers abducted 10 of them have been found dead. The rest